The Galactic Military Academy didn't believe in easy days. Which was, Hollis reflected, as another simulated explosion rocked the training lab, probably why her hands were currently elbow-deep in a sparking defense grid, while klaxons screamed bloody murder 3 feet from her head. "Cadet Bront, your shield array just collapsed for the 3rd time." Commander Ixmoc's voice cut through the chaos like a vibroblade through butter. "In actual combat, you'd be ionized particles by now." The massive Thurok, picture a boulder that decided to grow legs and develop anger management issues, grunted something that might have been an apology or a threat. Hard to tell with his species. His rocky fingers, each the size of a human forearm, struggled with the delicate circuitry before him. Watching Bront attempt precision engineering was like watching a landslide try to perform surgery. Hollis kept her focus on her own station, though her awareness had already catalogued Bront's problem. Wrong capacitor sequence, he'd installed the secondary buffer before the primary relay, along with roughly 18 other details about the room. The smell of ozone mixing with Pilket's stress pheromones, which smelled oddly like lavender and burning plastic. The rhythmic click-click-click of Ixmoc's mandibles as he paced between stations, a sound that most cadets had learned meant someone was about to have a very bad day. The slight temperature drop near the eastern wall where the environmental controls were developing a fault in their thermal regulation system. You know, normal stuff. "Pilket, your reaction time is improving," Ixmoc announced, somehow making a compliment sound like a threat assessment. "You only hesitated 0.3 seconds before responding to the last attack vector. In 0.3 seconds, your ship's bridge crew would be dead." The Luminari's bioluminescent patterns flickered distress. Rapid pulses of orange and red across her translucent skin. Beautiful species, the Luminari. They looked like someone had taken the concept of jellyfish, made it bipedal, and given it anxiety issues. Pilket's tendrils trembled as she worked, casting prismatic shadows across her workstation. Hollis stripped another wire, her fingers moving with the kind of automatic precision that comes from doing something roughly 10,000 times. The defense grid simulator was a nasty piece of work, deliberately designed to fail in cascading sequences that required you to predict problems 3 steps ahead, while fixing the current disaster. Most species found it overwhelming. Humans, apparently, found it Tuesday. Well, not Tuesday. It was actually the station's equivalent of Thursday, but the human is ahead of schedule again. That was Thex, her bunkmate, speaking in that particular tone of voice that suggested he was re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about the universe. Thex was Keldrin, like Ixmoc, all chitinous plates and too many joints in unsettling places, but younger, with the kind of cynicism that came from being told you're the galaxy's apex predators, and then watching a species that invented the wheel 5 minutes ago casually outperform you. "Don't distract her," Pilket whispered, which was kind of her. Also pointless. The thing about the Advanced Threat Response Lab, and really, about the entire Galactic Military Academy philosophy, was that distraction was the point. Real combat, the instructors loved to remind them, didn't politely wait for you to finish your current task before introducing new problems. Real combat was a screaming mess of simultaneous crises, and if you couldn't juggle multiple existential threats while maintaining primary objective focus, you were what the military termed a casualty waiting to happen. So the lab was deliberately designed as sensory hell. Alarms at random intervals, simulated weapons fire, gravity fluctuations, temperature swings, instructors shouting, other cadets cursing in 6 different languages, none of which were complimentary, and apparently occasionally hurling bladed weapons at your head. Hollis didn't see the blade coming. Her eyes were locked on the bundle of fiber optic cables she was routing through the grid's central node. But some part of her brain that had been running background threat assessment since the moment she'd entered the room noted the change in air pressure, calculated trajectory, estimated time to impact, and filed it under immediate action required. Her left hand came up, smooth and unhurried, fingers closing around the blade's handle with the casual ease of someone plucking an apple from a tree. The training knife, regulation composite, dulled edge but weighted for realistic throwing dynamics, settled into her grip like it had been made for her hand. Her right hand never stopped working. The room went silent. Even the simulated alarms seemed to hesitate, as if the training program itself was trying to process what just happened. Hollis finished the connection she'd been working on. Important not to leave live circuits partially routed. That's how you got feedback loops. And tested the circuit with her multimeter. Good voltage, clean signal. She set down her tools in a neat line, the way she always did, then carefully placed the blade on the edge of her workstation. Then, and only then, did she look up. Every cadet in the lab was staring at her. Brant's mouth hung open, revealing multiple rows of crystalline teeth. Pilkett had gone completely transparent except for her internal organs, which was apparently the luminary equivalent of shocked speechlessness. Thex's antennae had locked in the forward position, which his species did when they encountered something that fundamentally confused them. Commander Ixmock stood in the center of the room, all four arms crossed in what might have been approval, or might have been the prelude to ripping someone's head off. With the Keldrin, body language was more of a suggestion than a science. "Cadet Hollis," Ixmock said, his voice that particular frequency that made human teeth ache. "You caught my blade." It wasn't a question, but it felt like it needed an answer anyway. "Yes, Commander." Hollis kept her voice neutral. She'd learned early in her academy tenure that humans had a reputation for being either aggressively enthusiastic or weirdly stoic, with no middle ground. She aimed for stoic. Enthusiasm attracted attention, and attention was the enemy of getting work done. "While continuing your circuit work." "The connection couldn't wait, Commander. Live circuits don't pause for interruptions." Ixmock's mandibles did that clicking thing again, faster now. His compound eyes, hundreds of tiny lenses that could probably see in dimensions humans didn't have names for, studied her with an intensity that made Hollis's survival instincts suggest backing away slowly. She stayed put. Backing away from Keldrin made them think you were prey. Standing still made them think you were stupid. The trick was standing still while maintaining eye contact, which told them you were either brave or insane, both of which they respected. "You didn't look at the blade," Thex said, his voice carrying that edge of accusation that people got when reality stopped making sense. "You were focused on your work. You couldn't have seen—" "Peripheral vision," Hollis interrupted, which was technically true, but also wildly insufficient as an explanation. Humans have decent peripheral vision. "The blade was behind you," Pilkett pointed out quietly. Her patterns had shifted to curious blue, which was better than distressed orange. "I was watching. You couldn't have seen it with any vision, peripheral or otherwise." "Okay, that was a fair point." "Heard it then," Hollis tried, knowing even as she said it that this was going to spiral into one of those discussions about human sensory capabilities that always made her feel like a lab specimen. "Air displacement. The blade makes a distinctive sound when it moves." Brant made a noise like grinding rocks. "That's impossible. The ambient noise level in here is 83 decibels, mostly concentrated in the 200 to 800 hertz range," Hollis said, then immediately regretted it, because now everyone was staring harder. The blade's passage creates a distinct frequency spike around 1000 Hz. It's noticeable. The silence that followed was the kind that made you want to check if time had stopped. Noticeable, Ixmoc repeated, his tone suggesting he was tasting the word and finding it deeply suspicious. You processed ambient sound frequencies, isolated a specific acoustic signature, calculated trajectory, and executed a precision intercept, while rewiring a defense grid under simulated combat conditions. When he put it like that, it did sound kind of excessive. It wasn't that complicated, Commander. It wasn't, Thex sputtered, his antennae doing a little dance of incredulity. That's at minimum 4 separate cognitive processes running simultaneously. Most species can barely maintain 2 parallel thought streams without time, Ixmoc announced, and the simulation shut down with a hydraulic hiss that echoed through the suddenly quiet lab. Status reports, Bront? Incomplete, Commander. The Thurok sounded like he was admitting to murder. Shield array at 62% functionality. Pilket? 78%, Commander. 3 critical systems still compromised. Ixmoc's gaze swept the room, landing on each cadet in turn. Most were in similar states of partial completion, advanced enough to maybe survive an actual attack, but not exactly inspiring confidence. Hollis? Complete, Commander. All systems operational, redundancies in place, diagnostic checks passed. She paused. I also identified and corrected a design flaw in the secondary power coupling that was causing a 3% efficiency loss. The grinding sound that Bront made was definitely not an apology this time. Of course you did, Ixmoc said, and there was something in his voice that Hollis couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not even surprise, really. Something closer to confirmation, like he'd just won a bet with himself. Typical human peculiarity. He moved toward the exit, his forearms gesturing in patterns that meant different things depending on which pair you were watching. Dismissed. Except you, Hollis. Remain. And there it was, the attention she'd been trying to avoid. Hollis suppressed a sigh as the other cadets filed out, each one shooting her looks that ranged from impressed to disturbed to, in Thex's case, deeply suspicious. When the door sealed behind the last cadet, Ixmoc turned to face her fully. Up close, the Keldrin were even more intimidating, all predatory grace wrapped in biological armor that had evolved to shrug off small arms fire. That was a test, he said. I assumed as much, Commander. Not for you. His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. For me, I needed to confirm a hypothesis about human cognitive architecture. Hollis said nothing, because saying nothing was usually safer than saying something when superior officers started talking about hypotheses. Your species has been in the galactic community for 18 months, Ixmoc continued, beginning to pace. In that time, you've demonstrated capabilities that contradict everything we understand about neural specialization. Your combat personnel think like engineers. Your engineers fight like soldiers. Your medics improvise tactics. Your tacticians perform surgery. We're generalists, Hollis offered. Our evolution didn't favor specialization. Generalists don't catch thrown blades without breaking concentration. Generalists don't optimize defense grids while processing complex acoustic data. He stopped pacing, facing her directly. You weren't just working on that grid. You were monitoring every cadet in this room. You knew Bront's shield array was failing before I announced it. You noticed Pilket's stress response. You detected an environmental control fault that our own diagnostic systems missed. Okay, that was uncomfortably accurate. I'm observant, Commander. You're running threat assessment protocols on everything in your environment, all the time, as an unconscious background process. Iximok leaned closer, his mandibles spreading in what was definitely not a smile, because Keldrin didn't smile, but gave off similar energy. Your species doesn't have situational awareness. You have omnidirectional threat evaluation running continuously from the moment you wake up until you lose consciousness. Hollis considered denying it, then decided that was pointless. It's a survival adaptation. Earth was not a friendly place. Most worlds aren't friendly places. Most species adapted by specializing, becoming better predators, better at hiding, better at specific environmental niches. Ixmok's voice carried something that might have been respect, or might have been concern. Humans adapted by refusing to accept limitations. You became adequate at everything because you couldn't afford to be helpless at anything. That's a generous interpretation, Commander. It's a terrifying interpretation, he corrected, because it means your species doesn't think in terms of acceptable losses or manageable risks. You think in terms of solving every problem simultaneously, because historically, failing to juggle multiple existential threats meant extinction. He pulled a data pad from his equipment harness, his claws tapping across its surface with surprising delicacy. The Crucible Gauntlet begins in 6 days. Hollis felt her stomach drop. The Crucible Gauntlet, the Academy's premier competition, where cadets faced increasingly impossible scenarios in front of representatives from every major galactic power. Winning brought prestige, advancement, preferential assignments. Losing brought, well, mostly embarrassment, but the kind of embarrassment that followed you for your entire career. I'm entering you in the solo category. Commander, I'm an engineer, not a combat specialist, yes. I've read your file. Ixmok's mandibles clicked dismissively. Your file is also wrong. Your species doesn't distinguish between engineering and combat. You build while fighting and fight while building because, in your evolutionary history, those weren't separate activities. With respect, Commander, the Crucible Gauntlet is designed for elite combat cadets. I'll be competing against specialists who've trained their entire lives for combat scenarios. Yes. He held up the data pad, displaying her enrollment confirmation. They're very good at what they do. Exceptional, even. But they only do one thing at a time, because their neural architecture requires sequential processing of complex tasks. And you think I can multitask my way through the most difficult military competition in the galaxy? I think you already do multitask your way through every moment of your existence, and you don't even realize how abnormal that is. Ixmok's compound eyes gleamed in the lab's harsh lighting. The blade I threw? That wasn't a distraction test, Hollis. That was confirmation. You processed it, evaluated it, responded to it, and dismissed it, all without interrupting your primary task. That's not multitasking. That's parallel cognitive processing on a level that most species require artificial intelligence to achieve. He turned toward the door, then paused. The other species will enter the Crucible Gauntlet. With strategies, tactics, specialized training, you'll enter it being human. His mandibles spread wider. That's your advantage. You don't distinguish between thinking and doing, between analyzing and acting. Your species just does everything at once and acts confused when others can't. The door hissed open. 6 days, Hollis. I suggest you prepare. Then he was gone, leaving Hollis alone in the training lab with a growing sense that she'd just been volunteered for for something that was going to make catching knives seem relaxing by comparison. She looked down at her workstation, at the perfectly organized tools and the completed defense grid, and the blade still resting on the corner of her workspace. "Typical human peculiarity," she muttered to the empty room, then began the process of shutting down her station and running final diagnostics, because leaving equipment in an uncertain state was just asking for problems. Behind her, unnoticed, a monitoring camera recorded everything, feeding data to Instructor Quillanth's research terminal, where algorithms analyzed and cataloged every movement, every reaction, every impossible thing that humans did without thinking. The data was going to make for a very interesting report. News in the Galactic Military Academy traveled at roughly the speed of gossip, which turned out to be significantly faster than light, and twice as destructive. By the time Hollis made it back to her quarters, the blade catch had achieved legendary status, embellished, distorted, and replicated across every species' cultural lens, until the actual event was buried under layers of increasingly improbable retelling. The Thurok version involved her catching multiple blades while juggling live explosives. The Luminary Whisper Network suggested she'd done it blindfolded. One particularly creative Kormathi rumor claimed she'd caught the blade with her teeth. "You're famous," Thex announced from his bunk, his antennae twitching in that way that meant he was equal parts amused and disturbed. "Congratulations. I hate it for you." Hollis groaned and collapsed onto her own bunk, which was human-configured and therefore probably looked ridiculous to Keldrin eyes. Too soft, too flat, arranged horizontally like humans were afraid of falling. Thex's sleeping alcove was vertical, because apparently sleeping while standing was perfectly normal if you had an exoskeleton and a concerning number of joints. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that 3 different cadets asked me if humans have precognitive abilities." Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly, laughter, or the closest his species got to it. "I told them you were probably just lucky, but I don't think anyone believed me. Mostly because I don't think I believed me. It wasn't precognition. It was just paying attention to everything simultaneously while appearing to focus on one thing?" Thex shifted in his alcove, his chitinous plates scraping against the metal frame. "Hollis, I've been watching you for 2 months now. You always know when someone enters the room, even when you're facing away from the door. You anticipate equipment failures before diagnostic systems flag them. You navigate crowds without looking up. It's unsettling. It's just situational awareness. No species has situational awareness that comprehensive." He paused. "Well, except the hive minds, but they're cheating because they're literally multiple organisms sharing sensory input. You're one person with one brain doing what should require distributed neural processing." Hollis stared at the ceiling, standard station architecture, reinforced composite with luminescent strips that never quite achieved comfortable lighting. "Is this going to be a thing now? Everyone watching me like I'm some kind of curiosity?" "Probably," Thex admitted. "You're the first human in the Academy's advanced program. Everything you do becomes data. Everything unusual you do becomes a debate about whether humans are incredible or just incredibly weird. Can't I be both?" "You are both. That's the problem." The door chimed. Visitor requesting entry. Hollis pulled up the security feed on her personal pad, saw Pilket's distinctive translucent form hovering nervously in the corridor. "It's Pilket," Hollis called to Thex. "You decent?" "I'm always decent. I don't wear clothes." Point taken. "Enter." The door slid open, and Pilket drifted in. The Luminari moved more than walked, their bodies naturally buoyant in standard station gravity. Her bioluminescent patterns were cautious yellow, polite but uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice that peculiar resonance that came from vocal cords that were technically just vibrating membranes. "I wanted to ask you something about the lab incident." "Here we go," Thex muttered. Hollis sat up. "Sure. What's up?" Pilket's tendrils twisted together. Nervous gesture. "I was watching you the entire time Commander Ixmock was pacing the room. Before he threw the blade, I mean. And I noticed something strange." "Stranger than catching invisible projectiles?" Thex offered helpfully. "You were tracking him," Pilket continued, ignoring Thex. "Not with your eyes. Your eyes never left your work. But your body orientation shifted whenever he moved. Micro-adjustments, barely noticeable, but consistent. You always knew exactly where he was in the room." Hollis felt that familiar discomfort of being observed too closely. Sound, probably. His footsteps, the click of his mandibles. "The lab was extremely loud," Pilket interrupted, gentle but persistent. 83 decibels, you said. But you're telling me you could isolate specific footsteps and process spatial location while consciously focused on complex engineering? That's not just auditory processing. That's three-dimensional spatial modeling running as a background subroutine in your brain. When you put it like that, it sounds way more impressive than it actually is. Or way more terrifying, Thex added. I'm going with terrifying. Pilket's patterns shifted to curious blue. My species has exceptional visual processing. We can see in spectrums you can't and process motion faster than most predators. But we have to choose what to focus on. We can't track multiple targets while performing unrelated tasks. Our brains aren't structured for parallel processing at that level. Most brains aren't, said a new voice from the doorway. All three of them turned. How long had the door been open? To find Instructor Kulanth standing in the threshold. The Dokmari were amphibious, which meant Kulanth looked like someone had taken a salamander, scaled it up to human size, and given it a deeply unsettling smile. Instructor, Hollis said, standing automatically because you stood when instructors appeared, even in your own quarters. We didn't hear. I know. I've been here for 12 seconds. You, he gestured at Pilket and Thex, were focused on conversation. But Hollis noticed me at second 8, even though she was facing away from the door. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. She's been waiting to see if I'd announce myself. Hollis said nothing, because what could you say to that? Kulanth moved into the room with that distinctive Dokmari glide, legs moving but body remaining level, like he was on invisible rails. I've been researching human neurology since your species joined the Academy. Fascinating stuff. Your brains are remarkably inefficient compared to most species. Hollis said. Thanks? Not an insult, an observation. Most species evolved neurologically optimized structures, specialized regions for specialized tasks, minimal energy expenditure, maximum efficiency. Human brains are the opposite, wildly redundant, energy-intensive, and structurally chaotic. He pulled out a hollow projector, displaying a rotating human brain scan. But that inefficiency is your advantage. Thex leaned forward, antennae focused. How is chaos an advantage? Because chaos is flexible. Kulanth manipulated the hollow, highlighting different brain regions. When a Keldrin processes a threat, specific neural pathways activate in sequence. Perception, analysis, response. Clean, efficient, fast. But sequential. Only one major cognitive task at a time. He shifted the image to show multiple brain regions lighting up simultaneously. When a human processes a threat, everything activates at once. Visual cortex, auditory processing, motor planning, spatial reasoning, memory recall, predictive modeling, all firing in parallel. It's neurologically expensive, but it means humans genuinely perceive multiple simultaneous events as discrete but related data streams. That's impossible, Thex said flatly. The cognitive load would be overwhelming, yes, for most species. Quillanth's smile took on an almost predatory quality. Human brains compensate through something called neural plasticity, the ability to rewire connections in real time based on demand. If a human needs to process visual and auditory threats while performing manual tasks, their brain just creates new pathways to handle it. Pilkett's patterns flashed surprised green. That's not neurology. That's adaptive programming. It's evolution in a hostile environment, where generalists survived and specialists died. Quillanth dismissed the holo. Earth produced humans through 2 million years of environmental pressure that actively selected against specialization. Climate instability, predator diversity, resource unpredictability. Everything about your homeworld punished organisms that couldn't adapt quickly. So we're just neurologically paranoid? Hollis asked. You're neurologically prepared. Quillanth moved to the door, then paused. The Crucible Gauntlet is in 5 days. I assume Commander Ixmach told you. He mentioned it. Good. You should know. I'm one of the judges. His expression shifted to something almost sympathetic. The scenarios are designed to be impossible. They test how cadets handle failure, not success. Most species have cultural frameworks for honorable defeat. And humans? Humans don't have frameworks for defeat. You have frameworks for changing the parameters until defeat isn't an option. He tapped the doorframe with one webbed hand. It's going to be interesting watching you try to solve unsolvable problems. Then he was gone, leaving behind 3 cadets and roughly 1,000 unanswered questions. I don't like how everyone keeps calling you interesting, Thex said after a long silence. In military contexts, interesting usually precedes explosions. Hollis flopped back onto her bunk. 5 days. 5 days to prepare for scenarios designed to be impossible, judged by instructors who apparently think my brain is a circus act. Look at the positive side, Pilkett offered, her patterns shifting to encouraging purple. You're representing your entire species in galactic-level competition. No pressure. That's not the positive side. I know, Pilkett admitted. I was trying to help. Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly. Definitely laughter now. For what it's worth, I'm curious to see what happens when they throw impossible scenarios at someone whose species apparently doesn't believe in impossible. We believe in impossible, Hollis protested. We just don't believe in accepting it. That, Thex said, is exactly what I mean. The arena was excessive in the way that military demonstrations always were. Massive, gleaming, and designed to remind everyone watching that the Galactic Military Academy had funding to burn and reputations to maintain. Hollis stood in the staging area, surrounded by the kind of cadets who looked like they'd been grown in combat readiness vats. Bront loomed nearby, his rocky exterior somehow looking even more imposing under the arena's harsh lighting. Dix, the Kormathi assassin in training, moved with that predatory grace that made you want to check where the exits were. Holen represented the luminary with the kind of serene confidence that came from being a certified tech prodigy. And then there was Hollis, who'd spent the last 5 days frantically preparing for impossible scenarios, while trying not to think about the thousands of spectators currently filling the observation decks. Nervous? Holland asked, her patterns pulsing calm blue. Terrified, Hollis admitted. You? Moderately concerned. But I've run statistical models on the scenario types. I should perform adequately. Of course, she'd run statistical models. Luminari loved their data. Competitors, prepare for deployment. The arena's AI announced. Its voice, that particular synthetic quality that managed to sound both soothing and vaguely threatening. The staging area's floor began to descend. Classic dramatic entry, because apparently military training couldn't happen without theatrical flair. The crowd noise hit like a physical force as they emerged into the main arena. Thousands of beings from dozens of species creating a wall of sound that would have been impressive if it wasn't so overwhelming. Hollis spotted Commander Ixmock in the judges section, flanked by Instructor Q-Lanth and several other high-ranking officials she didn't recognize. Ixmock's mandibles clicked in what might have been encouragement, or might have been him already writing her obituary. Stage 1 begins in 30 seconds, the AI announced. Objective: navigate the structure while hacking security nodes. Structure collapse begins immediately. Competitors may choose speed or thoroughness. Both are unlikely. The arena floor shifted, mechanical components rising and reconfiguring into a nightmarish maze of platforms, catwalks, and suspended networks. Security nodes glowed at various points throughout, 12 of them, Hollis counted automatically, positioned to require maximum exposure to hazardous routes. Choose wisely, the AI said, which was probably the most ominous way to start a competition. The starting signal sounded, some kind of resonant tone that hurt Hollis's teeth, and the structure immediately began collapsing. Bront charged forward, his mass carrying him through obstacles that would have stopped smaller competitors. Dix became a blur of motion, choosing the fastest route and ignoring the security nodes entirely. Holland moved with calculated precision, heading for the nearest cluster of nodes. Hollis ran the calculations in half a heartbeat: structure collapse rate, node positions, optimal pathing, and realized the scenario was designed around forced choice. Speed meant survival, but incomplete objectives. Thoroughness meant completion, but structural failure. Most species would choose one or the other. Humans, apparently, chose both. She moved, her hands already pulling tools from her belt, while her feet found purchase on collapsing platforms. First node reached, she jammed a bypass spike into its access port while simultaneously jumping to the next platform. Her fingers flew across the bypass interface while her eyes tracked structural integrity and competitor positions. Node 1 cracked. Access granted. She didn't stop moving. The crowd noise changed pitch. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Most competitors had committed to their strategy. She was the only one actively hacking while in motion, treating the two tasks as integrated rather than sequential. Node 2, Node 3, her body flowed through the collapsing structure while her brain ran threat assessment and system infiltration as parallel processes. A support beam collapsed behind her. She'd already moved, because she'd calculated its failure point 8 seconds earlier. Cadet Hollis is attempting full completion, one of the commentators announced, their voice amplified across the arena. This is highly irregular. The structural integrity won't support. Node 4, Node 5. Her hands were bleeding, she'd noticed that later, from gripping sharp edges and hot circuits. Didn't matter. Problems could be acknowledged without being prioritized. Dix finished first, having skipped all the nodes. Fast, but incomplete. Bront came in second, managing 2 nodes through sheer stubborn persistence. Holland completed 6 nodes before the structure forced her to evacuate. Excellent performance by any standard. Hollis completed Node 12 as the final platform collapsed beneath her, forcing a controlled fall that she converted into a roll across the arena floor. Every node accessed. Every objective complete. 3 minutes, 18 seconds. The silence from the crowd was deafening. Stage 1 complete, the AI announced, sounding mildly surprised that its own simulation had been beaten. All competitors advanced to Stage 2. Hollis stood, checking herself for serious injuries. Minor cuts, some bruising, nothing that wouldn't heal, while trying to ignore the thousands of eyes focused on her. Thex's voice came through her personal comm, barely audible above the returning crowd noise. "That was the most aggressively human thing I've ever witnessed. I'm proud and disturbed in equal measure." Stage 2's arena configuration was simpler, but somehow more threatening. AT, defensive positions surrounded by tactical obstacles, with holographic opponents approaching from multiple vectors. The catch: competitors had to solve complex mathematical puzzles displayed on their position's central console. Solving the puzzles unlocked weapon systems. No solution meant no weapons meant very quick defeat. This scenario tests cognitive flexibility under combat pressure, the AI explained. Most species separate warrior and scholar castes. This scenario punishes that specialization. The starting signal sounded. Dix immediately began the puzzle, his assassin training apparently including mathematics. Smart. Bront tried to fight with improvised weapons, also smart, but ultimately limited. Holland worked the puzzle with impressive speed, while using the defensive position's environmental features for protection. Hollis glanced at the puzzle. Partial differential equations. Lovely. And felt something click in her brain. The equations weren't just math problems, they were tactical maps encoded as mathematical relationships. Solve the equations? Yes. But understanding the underlying patterns gave you predictive modeling of opponent behavior. She worked the puzzle with one hand while grabbing environmental objects with the other. A piece of debris became a club. A broken panel became a shield. Her brain processed the equations while her body moved through combat patterns, each solution revealing more about attack vectors and timing. The holographic opponents adapted. This was advanced AI, learning from her responses. Didn't matter. She was learning faster. She used the mathematical patterns to predict movement 3 steps ahead, positioning herself where opponents would be rather than where they were. The weapon system unlocked. She ignored it, having already neutralized threats with environmental improvisation. Dix went down to superior numbers despite unlocking weapons. Bront lasted surprisingly long through pure resilience, but eventually got overwhelmed. Holland completed the puzzle but couldn't maintain defensive positions against adaptive opponents. Hollis finished the puzzle, defeated all opponents, and was halfway through optimizing the defensive position's tactical layout when the AI called time. Stage 2 complete. 3 competitors advanced to finals: Hollis, Holland, Krell. Krell, the massive Thurok she hadn't been tracking, had apparently brute-forced his way through everything. Respect. The final stage arena configuration made Hollis's engineering instincts scream warnings. A reactor core, obviously simulated but convincingly rendered, with cascading failure indicators spreading across its control systems. Automated defense turrets tracking all movement. A scenario designed around controlled crisis management. Scenario objective: prevent reactor failure, the AI announced. Scenario parameters: reactor failure is inevitable. This is a no-win scenario. Competitors are judged on crisis response and damage. Mitigation. Oh, that was clever. They weren't testing if you could win. They were testing how you handled losing. Most species probably had cultural frameworks for that. Honorable defeat, acceptable losses, strategic retreat. Humans had frameworks for changing the game. The starting signal sounded. Krell immediately charged the reactor, trying to brute force repairs. Holland began calculating evacuation routes, smart, accepting the inevitable and optimizing survival. Hollis looked at the reactor, at the turrets, at the spreading failure indicators. Then she looked at the control systems running the scenario itself. Her hands moved across her tools, while her feet carried her through turret fire patterns she'd already calculated. She appeared to be working on the reactor. Everyone watching would think she was attempting repairs like Krell. She wasn't repairing anything. She was hacking the scenario. The reactor wasn't real. It was a holographic projection over functional systems. The failure was programmed, not physical. Every control system in this arena was networked, and networks could be accessed if you knew where to look, and didn't mind working while dodging automated weapons fire. Her tools interfaced with maintenance access ports that weren't supposed to be part of the scenario. Her brain tracked turret patterns while her hands rewrote scenario parameters. She wasn't fixing the reactor. She was exposing the simulation. The arena went dark. When emergency lighting activated 3 seconds later, Hollis stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by frozen holographic projections and deactivated turrets. The reactor simulation flickered, revealing the clean, functional core underneath. The silence from the judges' section was different from crowd silence. This was the silence of people rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew. Scenario compromised, the AI said, sounding distinctly confused. Parameters invalid. Simulation integrity failed. Hollis looked up at the judges' section, at Commander Ixmach's mandibles clicking rapidly, at Instructor Kulanth's too wide smile. "I didn't accept the no-win scenario," she said, her voice carrying in the silent arena. "The scenario said the reactor would fail. The reactor was never real. So I changed the scenario." The eruption of noise from the crowd, argument, amazement, outrage, washed over her like a wave. Commander Ixmach stood, his forearms spread in a gesture that called for silence. "We," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "need to discuss what just happened." The judges' chamber was significantly less impressive than the arena. Functional, sterile, and filled with the kind of uncomfortable furniture that discouraged long debates. Hollis sat in a human-configured chair that somehow managed to be both too soft and too rigid, while a dozen high-ranking military officials from 6 different species argued about whether she'd demonstrated tactical brilliance or committed some kind of competitive war crime. She violated scenario parameters, one official, a Thurok, with decorations suggesting extensive combat experience, rumbled. The test was designed to assess crisis management under impossible conditions. She ignored the test entirely. "She completed the test," Instructor Kulanth countered, his webbed hands gesturing expressively. The objective was preventing reactor failure. She prevented it by identifying that the failure was artificial and eliminating the artificiality. "That's not," another official started. "In actual combat," Commander Ixmach interrupted, his mandibles clicking sharp and authoritative, "scenarios don't come with parameters. Enemies don't follow test conditions. Crises don't politely limit themselves to expected boundaries." He gestured toward Hollis with 2 of his forearms. "She did exactly what combat requires. She assessed the real situation beneath the presented situation and acted accordingly. She hacked Academy systems during an official competition." The Thurok's rocky features somehow conveyed outrage. "That's exactly what I would do if I encountered a false crisis, designed to waste my resources during actual military operations," Ixmach said flatly. "Which makes it tactically sound." Hollis decided it was probably time to contribute to her own defense. "May I say something?" The chamber went quiet, all attention focusing on her with an intensity that made her want to hide under the too-rigid chair. "The scenario was designed to be unwinnable," she said, keeping her voice level. "You weren't testing if we could fix the reactor. You were testing how we'd handle inevitable failure." Krell tried to fight it. Honorable, shows determination. Holland calculated optimal evacuation. Smart, minimizes casualties. Both are valid responses to no-win scenarios. She stood, because sitting while everyone stared felt wrong. But humans don't have cultural frameworks for accepting no-win scenarios. We have frameworks for identifying why the scenario is unwinnable and fixing that instead. She gestured toward where the arena lay beyond the chamber walls. The reactor couldn't be repaired because it wasn't broken. It was programmed to fail. So the problem wasn't engineering, it was programming. I fixed the actual problem. "You changed the test," the Thurok said. "I changed the game," Hollis corrected. "Which is what you do when the game is designed to make you lose. In real combat, if I encountered a crisis that seemed inevitable, my first question would be, why is this inevitable? Is it actually inevitable? Or does someone want me to think it's inevitable? Because if it's the second option, then the real threat isn't the crisis. It's whoever programmed me to believe I couldn't win." Instructor Q-Lanth's smile widened to unsettling proportions. "And there it is. The fundamental human cognitive difference." He activated a holodisplay, showing neural scan comparisons between species. Most species evolved in ecological niches with defined roles: predators, prey, specialists in specific environments. Their neural architecture reflects this: optimized for specific tasks, efficient within defined parameters. He highlighted Hollis's brain scan. Humans evolved with no niche. They adapted to everything because they couldn't afford to specialize. Their neural architecture reflects this: wildly inefficient, energy-intensive, but capable of redefining parameters in real time. "You're saying humans are neurologically incapable of accepting limitations?" another judge asked. "I'm saying human brains treat limitations as problems to solve rather than conditions to accept." Q-Lanth manipulated the display, showing activity patterns. When most species encounter an impossible scenario, their threat assessment protocols recognize it as impossible and shift to damage mitigation. When humans encounter an impossible scenario, their brains start looking for why it's impossible and whether that can be changed. "That's not tactical thinking," the Thurok muttered. "That's survival thinking from a species that spent 2 million years in an environment where accepting impossibility meant extinction," Ixmok finished. "Earth didn't produce humans who gracefully accept defeat. It produced humans who redefine defeat until it stops applying." He turned to face Hollis directly. "The blade I threw wasn't testing your reflexes. It was confirming that your species processes environmental threats as continuous background operations while maintaining primary task focus. The Crucible Gauntlet wasn't testing if you could win. We knew you'd find a way to win, because humans don't accept not winning. We were testing how you'd win, what rules you'd bend, what parameters you'd reject, what impossible things you'd casually accomplish while acting confused about why everyone else found them impossible." The chamber fell silent. "So," Hollis said carefully, "did I pass or fail?" Ixmok's mandibles spread in that definitely not a smile expression. "You demonstrated that humans are dangerous, not because they're superior warriors or engineers or tacticians. You're dangerous because you refuse to accept that some problems can't be solved. which makes you either the most valuable allies in the galaxy or the most terrifying opponents, depending on which side of a conflict you're on. He gestured toward the door. Congratulations, Cadet Hollis. You won the Crucible Gauntlet by proving that humans don't compete in competitions. They rewrite competitions until winning becomes inevitable. His tone shifted, becoming almost gentle. Now, go away. You're giving the entire faculty existential crises about military doctrine. Hollis left, passing through corridors filled with cadets who stopped and stared, some with admiration, some with concern, most with that particular expression people got when reality stopped making comfortable sense. She found Thex waiting outside her quarters, his antennae twitching nervously. "Well?" he demanded. "I won, apparently, by cheating, which they've decided wasn't cheating because humans don't think rules and reality are the same thing. That's the most human explanation I've ever heard." Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Are you okay?" Hollis considered the question. The competition, the judgment, the uncomfortable realization that her species apparently went through life casually doing things other species considered impossible. "I just want to go back to fixing things without everyone watching." "Good luck with that. You're famous now." "I hate being famous." "I know," Thex said sympathetically. "Very human of you." 3 weeks later, Hollis stood in a quiet engineering bay on Deep Station Outpost 12, far from the Academy, far from crowds, exactly where she'd requested assignment. She was alone, elbow-deep in a malfunctioning power distribution system, perfectly content. An alarm sounded. Hull breach. Distant, but concerning. Without pausing her work, Hollis's left hand caught a wrench that had started floating in the sudden pressure change. Her right hand continued rerouting circuits. Her foot kicked a safety override that sealed the section. The breach was contained before station systems even finished alerting crew. An alien technician, species Hollis didn't recognize, stared from the doorway, their multifaceted eyes wide. Hollis didn't notice. The power distribution system was almost fixed, and that was more interesting than whatever expression the technician was making. The scanner on her workstation flared. Distraction detected, unauthorized presence in workspace. She'd already known someone was there. Had known for 18 seconds. Would acknowledge them when the current task was complete. Because that's what humans did. They processed everything, fixed everything, survived everything, and acted genuinely confused when other species suggested that maybe, possibly, doing everything simultaneously wasn't normal. The circuits connected. Power flowed clean and stable. Task complete. Hollis looked up, noticed the staring technician, offered a polite nod. "Hull breach is contained. Power's back to optimal. Anything else need fixing?" The technician made a noise that might have been several different emotions happening at once, then fled. Hollis shrugged and returned to her diagnostic checklist. Somewhere far away, in the Galactic Military Academy, Instructor Kalanth added another data point to his ever-growing research file on human neurology. The title read, "Humanity, a species that treats impossibility as a bug to fix rather than a feature to accept." The subtitle, added recently, read, "We're not ready for them. We might never be ready for them. But they're here anyway, catching our thrown blades and asking what's next."